had dreamed of this day for as long as I could remember. My wedding day. My name is Emma, a senior executive at a well-established company. I was marrying Mark, a man I had fallen deeply in love with. Though Mark was currently unemployed, he promised to pull his weight as soon as he got back on his feet. The venue was beautiful, straight out of a bridal magazine. The white roses, the elegantly laid tables, and the gentle glow of the fairy lights set the atmosphere for a magical evening. My dress was everything I'd ever wanted, lacy and trailing, making me feel like the heroine of some romantic novel. Family and friends gathered, smiles plastering everyone's faces except for one. Schmeig smarts. As I walked down the aisle, something caught my attention. Mark seemed distracted, his eyes not meeting mine. It felt like a splash of cold water on my face, but I chalked it up to pre-wedding jitters. We all get nervous, right? As the minister began speaking, I stole glances at Mark. His face seemed tapped, almost like he was holding back something. When the minister asked, "Do you, Mark, take Emma to be your lawfully wedded wife?" There was an unnerving pause before Mark responded. "I do," but it felt forced. Something wrong. I whispered to him as we posed for photos, my smile never reaching my eyes. "Like, sir." "No, just tired." "It's been a long day." Mark deflected, avoiding my gaze. His eyes weren't sparkling. They looked distant. It struck me that for a man who had just gotten married, he didn't look particularly thrilled. We moved to the reception, a hall adorned with even more flowers and twinkling lights. As I greeted the guests, accepting their warm wishes, I noticed Mark standing aloof. He wasn't mingling or even trying to look happy. He seemed like a man who had been sentenced rather than weed. "Mark, are you all right?" I finally pulled him aside to talk, my concern outweighing the desire to keep up appearances. "Yeah, just nervous, that's all," he said, looking away. "Wedding jitters, huh?" I attempted to lighten the mood. "Let's hear it." "Something like that," he mumbled, his eyes still not meeting mine. My bridesmaid. Sarah joined us. "Let's see. You guys look adorable together," she exclaimed, completely unaware of the tension. "Oh, thanks." "Sarah." I managed to smile, trying hard to keep the concern out of my voice. Mark nodded but said nothing. As the evening drew to a close, I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I watched Mark from across the room, his glass of champagne untouched, his eyes unfocused. This was supposed to be the happiest day of our lives, but it felt like a facade, one that was starting to show its cracks. I couldn't shake the nagging doubt that clouded this supposedly joyous occasion. My husband, the man I had just vowed to spend the rest of my life with, seemed almost like a stranger. The music swelled, and the newlyweds were called onto the floor for the first dance. As Mark held me, his hands felt cold, his grip loose. He was physically present, but emotionally distant, and in that moment, a horrifying thought crossed my mind. Did he actually want to be here married to me? As we moved to the rhythm of the song, the applause and cheers from our loved ones seemed to fade into a hollow echo. I felt like I was dancing with a ghost, a shell of the man I thought I knew. That night, as we retreated to our bridal suite, I looked into the mirror. The bride staring back at me seemed happy on the surface, but her eyes told a different story, one of uncertainty, doubt, and a growing realization that the fairy tale wedding she'd longed for was turning out to be anything but. And so, under the guise of love and matrimony, I found myself questioning what I had gotten into. The glaring signs were there, and as much as I wanted to dismiss them as mere wedding day jitters, deep down, I knew this was only the beginning of something far more complicated. Life after the wedding felt like stepping onto a moving treadmill. Everything was in motion, the settling into our new home, the daily routines, and my job, which remained as demanding as ever. The house was a comfortable two-story dwelling in a peaceful neighborhood, just a short commute away from my office. Mark had moved in with me, promising to find work soon and contribute to the household expenses. In the meantime, I didn't mind taking care of the bills. My salary was more than enough for both of us. For the first few weeks, things appeared to be smooth. We cooked dinner together, watched movies on weekends, and discussed how our days went. The light banter and affectionate exchanges made it feel like a genuine honeymoon phase. Mark would even occasionally talk about job opportunities he was exploring. "How was your day?" Emma would ask, genuinely interested. "It's busy as always." "How about you? Any luck with the job search?" I'd respond, ever hopeful. "Kaptor, I had an interview today. Seems promising. They'll let me know by the end of the week," he'd say, flashing me a smile that would ease my worries. But as weeks turned into months, the charm started wearing thin. Mark's promising interviews never materialized into actual jobs, and his demeanor began to change. He spent more time outside the house, his exits and entrances becoming increasingly unpredictable. It was on one of those evenings when the clock was inching toward midnight, and Mark was nowhere to be found, that I felt the first pangs of real worry. I couldn't help but call him, my voice tinged with both irritation and concern. "Where are you? It's getting late," I said the moment he picked up the phone. "Was out with friends." "Why? You keeping tabs on me now?" he snapped, his voice laden with annoyance. "No, I was just worried." "He didn't say you'd be out this late," I explained, my voice softer than I'd have liked it to be. "Well, now you know. See you when I see you," he said dismissively, ending the call. When he finally stumbled through the door, reeking of alcohol and late-night regrets, I couldn't contain my frustration any longer. "Mark, what's going on with you? This isn't like you," I implored, hoping to break through whatever wall he had built around himself. "Nothing's going on." "Stop being so controlling," he retorted, avoiding my eyes as he headed straight for the bedroom, closing the door behind him with a thud that seemed to reverberate through my entire being. As I stood there, alone in the silence of our home, I felt a torrent of emotions wash over me. The confusion, disappointment, the toxic cocktail that no wife should have to swallow. The disconnect between us had grown from a crack into a gaping chasm, and it was becoming more evident that the man I married was not who he had seemed to be. The honeymoon phase, if it ever truly existed, was officially over. The man I thought was my soulmate was turning into a stranger before my eyes. What was even more worrying was that this stranger was someone I could neither understand nor predict. And as I went to bed that night, lying awake beside a man who felt miles away even though he was right next to me, I couldn't shake the sinking feeling that this was merely the prelude to a series of unraveling threads in the tapestry of our marriage. Just when I thought the lows couldn't get any lower, life threw me another curveball. My father as a pillar, strength and wisdom in my life, became seriously ill. The prognosis was grim. He didn't have much time left. The news arrived on a weekday evening. I was slogging through a mountain of emails when my phone buzzed. It was my mother's number. The tremor in her voice told me everything before she even got to the point. "Emma, you need to come home. It's your father. He's not doing well." The world around me seemed to freeze. It's my work, my troubled marriage, all the stresses that had consumed my life. All of it faded away, eclipsed by the monumental sorrow that gripped me. I left the office immediately and drove straight to my parents' house. My mind was a whirlpool of dread and disbelief as I stepped into my father's room. The sight of him, frail and a shadow of his former self, felt like a knife to my heart. But even in his weakened state, his eyes still twinkled with warmth when he saw me. "Emma," he whispered, "come here." And beside him, I fought to hold back tears. He took my hand, his grip feeble yet full of affection. "I don't have much time," he began, "and there are things I need to take care of." I looked at him, my eyes bleeding. "Dad, don't talk like that. I'm going to get through this," I choked out. He sighed, shaking his head slightly. "It's my beautiful, optimistic Emma. I wish I could believe that. I've lived a good life, and I want to make sure you're taken care of after I'm gone." I felt a lump in my throat but couldn't speak. My father continued, "I'm writing you a will. You'll inherit $10 million. I stared at him, speechless. Money was the furthest thing from my mind. All I could think about was how much I wanted him to stay, to be there for future milestones, to meet his future grandchildren. "Please." "Dad, I don't care about the money. I care about you," I finally managed to say. He smiled, a bittersweet expression that conveyed love, regret, and resignation all at once. "I know, Emma, and that's why I love you. But a father worries about his children no matter how old they are." That night, as I returned to the house I shared with Mark, I felt like I was moving through a thick fog of sorrow. When I walked in, I found Mark on the couch, a beer in hand, watching TV as if it was just another regular evening. "Mark, we need to talk," I began, my voice quivering despite my best efforts to control it. He muted the TV, looked at me, and sighed. "What now?" "It's my dad. He's seriously ill, and he doesn't have much time left." I choked out, the words like shards of glass in my throat. Mark's reaction was not what I expected. Instead of concern or sympathy, his eyes flickered with something else, something cold. "So what does this mean for us, son?" confused. I continued, "He's writing a will. He wants to leave me $10 million. For the first time in a long while. Mark seemed genuinely interested. 10 million. That's a lot of money. His response took me aback. Mark, are you even listening to yourself? My father is dying. He shrugged, his face an emotionless mask. Well, life goes on, Emma. It was then that I felt the ground beneath me truly crumble. Any remaining illusions about the man I had married were shattered in that moment, as my personal life spiraled into an abyss. I came to a horrifying realization. Not only was I losing my father, but my marriage was a farce, and the man I had pledged to spend my life with was nothing more than a stranger, veiling his selfish motives under the guise of love. As I retreated to my room, grappling with the enormity of the double tragedy that was unfolding, I knew that my life had reached a point of no return. The man who had raised me was slipping away, and the man I had married was not who I thought he was. And so, in the quiet solitude of my thoughts, I made a solemn vow. I would take control of my life again, no matter what it took. The days that followed my father's diagnosis were a surreal blur. Between hospital visits and work responsibilities, the strain was taking a toll on me. What made it worse was Mark's increasing detachment. Instead of supporting me during this difficult time, he seemed to become more aloof, even greedy. His curiosity about my father's will, his hints about what we could do with the money, each comment struck me as more inappropriate than the last. Then came the funeral. The moment was as heartbreaking as I had imagined, saying a final goodbye to the man who had been my first hero, my father. Friends and relatives gathered to pay their respects, offering condolences and sharing memories of happier times. It was a couple of days after the funeral when the final straw broke. Mark came home drunk, his movements unsteady and his words slurred. I had grown accustomed to this by now, but tonight was different. Like questioni. Antations, a twinette pulls it in. I felt the weight of my father's absence, the emptiness of my home, and the failure of my marriage all collapsing in on me. So, have the lawyers gotten back to you about the will? Mark blurted out, staggering into the living room where I was seated. Yes, they have. I replied, my voice devoid of emotion, and I paused, contemplating whether or not to go through with the plan I had set in motion earlier. Taking a deep breath, I decided it was time. I'm so same crapters to be at yours. I'm only getting $100,000. I lied. His face contorted with anger. You gotta be kidding me. $100,000. What about the $10 million? The rest is being donated to charity and research foundations, as per my father's wishes. I added, reinforcing my manufactured story. Mark's eyes, already bloodshot from drinking, seemed to flash with rage. So you're telling me we can't even do anything decent with the inheritance? Your father screws us over even in death. His next action took me by surprise, although maybe it shouldn't have. Mark's hand flew through the air, landing a stinging slap on my cheek. The room spun for a moment, and I tasted the salty tang of blood from my bitten lip. I had prepared for this. Before a conversation, I set my phone to record video and placed it discreetly on a nearby shelf. It had captured everything. Mark, we're done, I said, picking up my phone and stopping the recording. And just so you know, you've given me all I need to end this farce of a marriage and make sure you can't harm me or anyone else. His eyes widened as realization dawned on him. You set me up. No, you set yourself up. From the day we got married, perhaps even before that, you just showed your true colors, and they're not colors I want in my life. I left him standing there, his face a mixture of confusion, regret, and perhaps for the first time, a hint of understanding about the magnitude of his actions. But it was too late. I was already gone, not physically, but emotionally and spiritually. My marriage had fallen apart, irrevocably shattered by betrayal, greed, and violence. The next steps, legal separation, the divorce, and the court case for domestic violence, were just formalities. The emotional verdict was already in. Our marriage was over. As I retreated to my room, locking the door behind me, I felt a peculiar sense of relief mixed with immense sorrow. The man I once loved was a stranger, and my father, the man who had loved me unconditionally, was gone. Oh, yet in that moment, I knew that I had the strength to rise from these ashes. It was time to take back control, to rebuild, and most importantly, to seek justice not just for myself, but also for the memory of my father who had always wanted nothing but the best for me. The weeks following the funeral were a whirlwind of legal proceedings, paperwork, and consultations with my attorney. It felt like I was living in a parallel universe, going through the motions, detached from the emotional trauma I had been experiencing. But I was fueled by a newfound determination. I had to put an end to this toxic relationship and ensure that Mark faced the consequences for his actions. Finally, the day of the trial arrived. As I sat in the courtroom, my palms sweaty but my resolve firm. I looked across to see Mark. His eyes met mine briefly, and for a split second, I thought I saw a glimmer of remorse. But it was swiftly replaced by that all-too-familiar coldness. The proceedings began. The evidence was damning. My testimony backed by the irrefutable video proof of Mark's drunken rage and violence. His defense was weak, mostly revolving around the pressure he had been under, the job search that had taken a toll on him, and the impact of my father's wealth on his psyche. But it all sounded so hollow, a feeble attempt to evade responsibility for his own failings and betrayals. As the judge announced that Mark was sentenced to 4 years in prison for domestic violence, a collective gasp filled the room. Mark's face turned a shade paler. His eyes met mine again, and this time there was no mistaking the regret. Though whether it was regret for his actions or regret for getting caught, I couldn't say. "Is there anything you'd like to say before we conclude?" the judge asked, his eyes scanning the room. Mark stood up. "But, Your Honor, waiting. May I speak?" "Your Honor?" The judge nodded, and I took a deep breath before beginning. "Your Honor, I stand here not as a victim, but as a survivor. The man sitting there," I pointed at Mark, "robbed me of my trust, my peace, and my happiness. But he did not rob me of my strength or my ability to fight back." Mark's eyes widened. It was as if he was seeing me for the first time. "I did love him," I continued, "and perhaps that's why his betrayal hurt so much. But the one thing I've learned from this painful chapter of my life is that love should never be an excuse for abuse, for turning a blind eye to someone's cruel, selfish actions." I paused, glancing at Mark one last time. "You had every opportunity to be better, to do better. But you chose otherwise. I hope these years in prison give you time to reflect on the lives you've affected and the damage you've done. Because when you get out, the life we had will be long gone. A mere footnote in my story, but the consequences of your choices, those will follow you forever." The room fell silent as I took my seat, a sense of finality washing over me. This was it, the end of a chapter, the closure I had yearned for. I had laid bare the man who had pretended to love me, unveiling his true self for the world to see. As I walked out of the courtroom, my attorney by my side, a strange sense of peace settled in. I had faced my worst fears and had come out on the other side stronger than ever. But for the first time in months, I was looking forward to the future, to turning the page and starting a new chapter. And this time, I would be the one in control. The one in control writing my own story life after the trial felt like waking up from a long, unsettling dream. Mark was behind bars serving time for the pain he inflicted not just physically, but emotionally and psychologically. Although this was a form of justice, a part of me knew that real healing had only just begun with Mark out of the picture. I had to focus on rebuilding myself. I intensified my work, started taking up new hobbies, and even began volunteering at a local shelter for victims of domestic abuse. It was through these actions that I felt my old self re-emerging strong, independent, and resilient. A few months later, my attorney called Emma. Mark's lawyers have filed an appeal. They're citing new evidence, though they've been very vague about what it is. I wanted to give you a heads up. I felt a momentary pang of anxiety. What are the chances that it could overturn the conviction? But it wasn't just about defeating his. It was about defeating him in court. It was about reclaiming my life, my dignity, and my self-worth. I knew that real healing would take time. The scars left by betrayal and abuse don't disappear overnight. But now I had something invaluable, the space to heal and the freedom to build a future on my own terms. As I sat there contemplating the roller coaster journey I'd been through, I realized that I had come out stronger, wiser, and more resilient. See, Mark's actions, while devastating, served as a painful catalyst for my own growth and transformation. It was a reckoning, not just for Mark, but for me as well. A reckoning that challenged me to rise from the ashes, to turn suffering into strength, and to emerge not as a victim, but as a survivor ready to face whatever comes next. And so as the sun set, casting warm golden hues through my window, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. I was ready to turn the page, to embark on a new chapter. This time I would be the author of my own destiny, free from the shadows of the past. And whatever came next, I was ready.